Welcome to the podcast where we track down Australian war veterans, have a chat with them, and hear their stories. I'm Alex Lloyd, and this is Life on the Line.
They were building positions in there
If
for
anything
a
happened
fight.
to us, by the time anyone got to us,
I think it was
the
chaos.
weather was so bad there would be
I used to
nobody
run
left.
with boots full of blood.
And the next thing I hear was alarms,
Chances of
screaming.
survival were very, very slim.
The soldiers didn't want to go into the ambushes, so they'd send the kids in first. And so he was sent in first into an ambush and he got shot in the stomach.
It was very hard for me, very hard for my family.
And the plane burst into
Proud of the
flames.
crew, proud of what I've achieved and what I'm
To
doing.
volunteer for service was in effect to put your life on the line.
I spoke with Doug Symes Snr. Doug is a veteran of World War II and the Korean War. Doug served below decks, first as a stoker and then a butcher. I spoke with Doug about his upbringing, the family butchery business, his various family members' wartime experiences, and his own. This conversation is a smaller war story, but I really enjoyed hearing about Doug's family life before he actually went to war. It's a fascinating glimpse of how life was disrupted for so many ordinary Australians, families and businesses broken apart for the sake of war. I hope you enjoy the conversation. I'm Alex Lloyd, and I'm joined on Life on the Line today by Doug Symes Snr. Thank you for joining me on the podcast, Doug. So, Doug, when and where were you born?
In Orroroo District Hospital in the north of South Australia. I was the sixth child of Harold and Emily Symes, and was born in the hospital, and my mother, she had been born in that hospital before me, and it was more or less a family town. My mother's father, he was a railway contractor, and he carted the railway supplies with the railway lines and sleepers with his horses and lorries, and he'd come originally from Burra in South Australia, and they'd settled up in Orroroo because that was midway between Tarrawi and Corn, and that's where they decided to settle and raise a family. And as I said, I was a sixth child, and I had 8 sisters and 1 brother.
And you were born in 1926?
26, yep.
Now, Doug, there is quite an extended military tradition in your family with your uncles and brothers and
yeah.
your descendants. Let's
Yeah.
start with your father, Harold.
Yeah,
William Symes.
well, when I grew up, from the day I could walk, I think, I used to wear bits and pieces of my father's uniform because he was in the 3rd Australian Light Horse. And you've probably heard a lot in the last few weeks about Beersheba. He was in the final charge at Beersheba in the Light Horse, and he'd been there, and he joined the army, the AIF, I suppose it was in those days, in about 1916. And I've seen letters that he wrote to my mother from over in Egypt, and apologising to Mum for bloody leaving her with the 3 kids and him being over in Egypt with the army and bloody living on the fat of the land. But he enjoyed the army life. Along the line, he claimed his brother into the regiment, and his elder brother, Tom, was killed at the Battle of Romani, and they were 3 light horsemen. And from the day I could bloody stand, I was army. Every time I went up past a drill, I used to salute it, you know, even as a little fella. And then, of course, later on, war came, and my brother, before the war, he was a member of the 9th 23rd Light Horse, and that was their headquarters was in Orroroo, and Dad more or less made sure Jack joined the light horse, and Jack wasn't a horseman, but it didn't take him long, and he moved himself up in the light horse. He was a sergeant, platoon leader and everything, and when they went to camps and everything, he was among the kingpins in the camps. And of course, they used to run their military sports in those days, you know, with the light horse. Used to put the horses over the jumps and everything, and everybody went there. And I know whatever bits and pieces of army that I could see, I wore, whether it was a colour patch or a hat or a whip or something. But to me, that was the light horse was everything. I was horse mad because across the road there was a horse trainer, and he used to come and get me, and I used to go over and help him with his training his horses, and that probably more of a hindrance than a bloody help. But I was there because my life was horses and the army. Of course, the next thing what came along, I was pretty good at school, I'll have to tell you that. And my father wanted me educated and to go to college and everything. And when I got a bit older, I was expected to help in the business because we were bushers. And as far back as I could remember, there was something to do with the business, either going to school or coming home from school. Pick up the sheep for the afternoon's kill, and then put the sheep back in the overnight paddock and things like that. And when I'd go home, it would be dark, because in those days before refrigeration, with the meat you used to have to kill after the sun went down, because you used to have to battle the bloody blowflies. And then your meat was left out over, and you went home and did all your chores at home. And the first thing I did when I got home was make sure the horses were fed to go into the carts in the morning so the men could be there. The chooks were fed, and the worst bloody thing of the lot, the cows had to be milked. And that was so Mum could get on with the business of the milk and everything. And I used to get to school from there. And after I got a bit older, I suppose about 10 or 11, one day my father said to me, "I think I can get you a push bike," because we didn't have push bikes. No one had money to buy any push bikes. But the old man saw somebody with a second-hand bike, and he said, "If I got you that bike," he said, "could you do a round before you went to school and take the orders and everything?"
Be the delivery boy.
Yeah. People didn't have refrigerators, you see, and they wanted their meat for lunch. And then again, they'd want meat for dinner at night time, but I was not having fridges, so I had to have the one delivery a day. That went on, and of course, as things improved and I got older, I was seconded down to the slaughter yards, I used to have to take the stock in for the day's kill, and then after a while, it wasn't very long, and I was into the kill, and I became a slaughterman. And even at a very young age, I was a proficient slaughterman. Still at school, mind you. I was 15. My mother said, "Well, your father is very ill." I'd know he'd had a stroke and he wasn't very well, wasn't getting anywhere. She said, "We got to be very careful with him." And anyhow, the next day I got home and my father had died. And of course, we had the business, and someone had to run the business for Mum. It was wartime, and The young men had been called up to go to the buddy into the army and what have you. And I was put into the shop. I finished school at 12 o'clock and I started work in the shop at 1 o'clock.
How did you feel about that, not getting to complete your education fully? Were you okay with that, or were you just committed to the family business?
My greatest thing was to be with my mother and help her and my oldest sister, because I felt that I was the person that was needed in the shop. Although I was only 15, I was proficient. I could do the shop work and do the small goods and the slaughtering. And the local policeman wasn't around. I used to drive the truck around doing the delivery.
So you're a slaughterman at 14, 15 years old, and you're surrounded by death, blood and guts of animals at such a young age. Do you think that desensitized you to death, and did it prepare you for the war that you were yet to fight in?
Well, blood and guts didn't worry me, if that's what you mean. If people got in my way, it was just bad luck on their behalf.
I think that answers my question. Now let's talk about your brother Jack. He also fought in World War II. So before we get to your story, Doug, your brother Jack, he fights in the 9th Cavalry Division before transferring to the Commandos.
And finished up with the 9th Cavalry Commandos.
I've got him down here as serving in Egypt, Syria, Palestine, Battle of El Alamein, Balak Papan. Can you tell me a bit about his war experiences from what you know? It sounds like an amazing story.
They went out in his first trip or his initial trip overseas. They went up and they fought through Syria, and he was in the 9th Cavalry, and in those days that consisted of Bren gun carriers. You know the Bren gun carriers?
Can you describe them for the listener who might not know?
Oh, they were like a little Bren gun carrier. He wasn't much bigger than the ordinary farm tractor, and he was armed with Bren guns, and Bren guns were the machine gun of that era, and very accurate. And these people, they used to scoot around the desert like bloody kids in a motor car, you know. And they got out, and because of their size and mobility, they could get into the hills around Syria and everywhere. And they came back down through Tripoli and Beirut, and then they came back and they went out into the desert. They were fought and trained in the desert.
Your brother's fighting Rommel at this stage.
Oh yes, old Rommel and Jack with his mob. I think at that stage he was a captain, and he used to run the show a bit. And then I remember one morning, 1942, it must have been the end of October, and the advertiser had said there that the Battle of El Alamein, they were led into battle by little Captain Harry Sean Savararu. And God, that just lifted me so bloody high, and the whole town, you know, and they still had an army component in the town. From there on, Brother Jack, he was the toast of the town.
I can imagine seeing your brother, Harold Symes, who obviously goes by the name Jack, and seeing him read out as the heroic officer leading the charge against the Afrika Korps. Would be such a huge pride for the town, for your family. And does that inspire you then, the following year, 1943, to join the Royal Australian Navy?
I reckon I would have followed Jack every step in my life from 2 years old, and whatever he did, I was there. When he was in the light horse as an 18-year-old, it just got made. My job was to polish the harness for his horses and make sure everything was bloody done. And that's it.
But your brother, he's a light horseman and then cavalry division.
Well, they changed from light horse to cavalry.
Yes, but it Yeah, they scrap the light horse, go to cavalry, but he's in the army. You follow him every step of the way throughout your life. You've grown up admiring your father for his charge at Beersheba. Your older brother's now a hero of the army.
Yeah.
Why do you instead go to the Navy?
Now you're getting down to why I'm here. See, I told you I was working in the butcher's shop. I had to leave school the day I was 14. And my sister used to use me in the butcher's shop, and the manager and sorterman got called up. And I was more or less the boy in the shop. Anyhow, there was an area officer down in Tarawi, and an army area officer, and he used to look after and try to recruit all the people he could for his army. And what he wanted, he always come up to my sister and he used to say to her, because we were under manpower restrictions, and he reckoned she was carrying one bloke too much in the business. So when she got a chance or got heard that this character was coming around, she knew she had contact. She used to second me to the drover. I told you he was a horseman, horse trainer that lived for us. And because butchers were a protected industry.
Protected industry. From...
And so was drovers were a protected industry. And she used to hear that this character was around, and she used to duck up me for one. Sometimes I'd be away for 6 weeks or more, so this bloke wouldn't want me.
But you're doing that in the interest of protecting the family business and keeping it going.
Yeah, and she's a wonderful girl. And anyhow, then we get to the stage, as you say, how do I want to get to know you? Well, all the blokes that I'd gone to school with and worked with, they were all about a year ahead of me. And I don't know whether I was ahead of them or they were behind me, but they were getting called up and were in the army. And of course I didn't want to be stuck at home where there's nobody there, so, and there it is. And one day somebody showed me a piece of paper and they said, hey, if you want to bloody join up, look at that. You can get into the Navy at 17. I worked on this and I was only a few months away from my 17th birthday. I said to my mum, I think I'll join the Merchant Navy. And she said, no, she said, don't join the Merchant Navy. She said, you join the Royal Australian Navy because the war will probably be over in a month or two.
We wished.
And she said that will be all over. So anyhow, I started off, I did my basic training from Torrens, went to Cerberus and went back to Torrens after I'd done the basic. And I was in a couple of smallish ships in the examination vessels around Torrens. And one day the engineer said to me, he said, I've got a ship for you. Next morning he come in and he said to me, go and pack your bag and hammock, he said, and get down to Beryl 2. She's sailing tomorrow. And away I went. And away, that started me being a stoker on a ship. And away we went, and we went up to Port Moresby. We became the examination office ship up in Port Moresby.
HMAS Beryl II was a civilian vessel built in 1914 and was requisitioned by the Royal Australian Navy just days after war broke out in September 1939. Beryl II began its war as an auxiliary minesweeper. From January 1944 to April 1945, she served in Port Moresby as a boomgate vessel. This meant that Beryl II was an auxiliary ship, controlling and defending the port by means of anti-torpedo or anti-submarine steel nets. Doug also recalls Beryl II serving as an examination vessel.
In Adelaide, you had ships of all nations used to come into the harbour, and before they came in, they were met by an examination officer, and their papers were corrected, and they were certified either to come in or go out. That was the examination. They had underwater cables to stop ships coming in, and we used to have to open the gate to let ships come in and out.
How are you feeling about this deployment? Because Japan's well into the war by now, and their notoriety and the fear of them reaching Australia, I mean, they've done it with midget subs and bombing Darwin by this point. How do you feel getting that close to the action and the front line almost of our efforts against Japan? Were you nervous, or...?
The thing was, you wasn't an individual. You was part of a team, and everybody pulled together, if you know what I mean. There were times at night you wake up and you think, oh, I wonder what Mum's doing, I wonder if the kid all right, and things like that, but all together. And that was it. And the next thing, the bloody bell rang for action stations. And you forgot everything. You was all part of that, all one thing.
You were drilled into just focus on the task at hand.
That's right. And that was get it all going. And we didn't have a lot of bad action and things like that, although we had a few coast calls and you'd know what it was, but whatever happened, you had to get out and investigate it because you didn't know what was under the water. And we didn't have any sonar or anything like that. We just had a few guns and a couple of depth charges.
So you have to investigate the odd blip that comes your way, and might be something, it might not be.
Well, you don't know.
You have to know. You have to find out.
It.
Any planes as well flying overhead?
Yes, planes would go up. You'd have your lookouts to check them up there. I know I see it one time there. We was in Redcar-Bay and these planes were coming around and they'd been chasing a Japanese plane and that was it. But we didn't have anything that couldn't combat them, you know. So.
Well, after Kokoda and other victories, you almost have felt a bit of confidence that we can do this, we can hold the line. We held back the Germans at Tobruk, we held back the Japanese at Kokoda, we can do
That's
this.
right.
Where do you go? Are you on Barrel 2 for the rest of the war, or do you have another deployment?
No, but I know how they got Kokoda. My cousin who was in the army in the 39th Battalion, it was up at Kokoda. He said, I fixed them. He said, I was a cook. He said that nobody got past my cooking. And he said, that's how we beat the Japanese at Kokoda.
That's the real story, is it?
Yeah. And after we went aground on the Beryl coup when the ship's company was split up because there was a bit of an inquiry and they didn't know who caused the trouble or anything. And I got shot down to Canberra. Changed in the meantime from a butcher from a stoker to a butcher. I was there for 12 months and then I went up to Townsville, then the war ended and I got shot back up to New Guinea for another 12 months. And that was the end of my wartime story. But after that I did another 20 years in the Navy.
Before we continue that, let's go back to your brother for a moment. He will have finished his time in the Desert War, and when he changes over to the Commandos, is that when he's fighting at Balikpapan in 1945?
Yep. I'll tell that story of that if you'd like to hear that.
Please.
They came back and they were given the orders to go up to Ravenshope, which is outside of Cairns or whatever. And he said, we were paraded there, and the colonel in charge, he said, we've been selected to be a fighting unit. And he said, I have volunteered to be a commando. Any men in the regiment that wishes to follow mine, Ptolemy, you don't have to. He said, but anybody that wishes to come with me, take one step forward. And the whole moved as one piece. And he said, now we start. He said, we're commandos, we're self-sufficient. See that jungle over there? That's our training ground. And we're given so many months to develop the training ground, and away we go. We're into that. And they got it down there, and they trained their men to the proficiency, and then they got down to Cairns, and my brother said, we're all on the wharf, the whole regiment's there, and there's all these landing ships and barges there. And he said to the boss, he said, now, what happens now? He said, we got the ships, we got the men, we haven't got anybody to crew the ship. I said, you people are self-sufficient. He said, you know all about navigation and everything. You got your own engineers. Get onto the ships as indicated on the program, and you take your ships up the Balikpapan. I said, there'll be a note on your desk. He said, what to do. You'll have your instructions for the first 10 hours or something, and then it gets rid of those instructions from the army office. He said, then from there on, you people are in control. You're right.
You're self-sufficient, you're independent, here's your mission, go work it out, go get it done.
That's dead right. And he said, as he said, you're trained in navigation, you're engineers and everything, and that's how we went.
They do the job of a whole platoon in one small section.
Yeah, they did the lot, and he got up there, and that's where he finished.
So they were making manoeuvres through the jungle, ambushing Japanese positions, assaults, that kind of thing?
Yeah, they could do anything, bloody. And they were told they were supermen. They'd been trained with that jungle training. They only had about 6 months or something, and during that time they had to clear the jungle, get in, get parade grounds and everything going, and then go down to the wharf, and there where the ships were waiting, and not a sailor in sight.
So let's jump back to you. So you are a stoker on Beryl 2. You then go back to our capital city, Canberra, as a butcher.
Yeah.
And then you finish your service when the war ends and go back to your civilian trade as a butcher. So do you go back?
Yeah, but I couldn't handle that. I was married by then, just towards the end of the war. Because I got married one day and told that I was going to sea the next day. Anyhow, I lucky I had a good girl and everything, and I got out after the war. I just couldn't handle it. I re-entered, and I went back into Cerberus, and then I went to the Melbourne.
What was it about civilian life you couldn't handle?
Oh, first of all was the money. I had 6 children, and the wife was like me. She was only a young. It's just one of those things, and she felt that if I wasn't there, I could provide more help by not being there. And she got hold of it, and she looked after the kids, and without me being a drain on the bloody bank account, she was able to get on her feet.
So you decided it was better for you to leave and provide for the family from afar?
Well, I was getting a better wage by being in the Navy, you see. I tried that twice. I did a 2-year stint, and then I did another stint, and then got to the stage that the family was settled and consolidated, and we were starting to get ahead, and I went back to sea, and I finished up. I went to the Melbourne.
Let's jump back to the 50s first. So when you rejoin, you're aboard HMAS Sydney 3, and you're at the coronation of Queen Elizabeth in London.
We went over there. We went over there to see Lizzie crowned and everything.
What role were you on the Sydney at that time?
Oh, well, I was a ship's butcher. The sailors and upper deck people were the ones that were used for street lining parties and things like that. But the the other people, we used to have to be there to feed them and everything. So that cut the skeleton right down to the skeleton staff. And that meant that there was, only a few of everything. And we had to fill in and make sure that everything was done.
That must be quite something, though, to be at the coronation of Britain's longest-serving monarch, and she's born... When is she born compared to you?
She was born 18 days later.
So you're basically the same age, and you've watched her be the monarch.
Sort of, so her whole career.
How's that been, watching that over...
Oh, that's all part of the act, I tell you. It gets me. And, of course, although we didn't feature in the march or anything, there were other places and things that we went to during the coronation ceremony.
And then after the coronation, you find yourself at Korea.
Yeah, away we went up there.
That is part of my conversation with Doug Symes Snr. We also spoke about the Korean War, Doug's son who followed in his footsteps, and the rest of Doug's life on the sea. But I'm saving that for a future special episode. Make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast to find out more later this year. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Life on the Line Podcast and on Twitter at LOTL Pod. Email us at podcast@lifeonthelinepodcast.com and visit our website www.lifeonthelinepodcast.com. My thanks go to the HMAS Sydney and Vietnam Logistical Support Veterans Association and the Frankston Naval Memorial Club for making this episode possible. Special thanks in particular go to Dr. John Carroll and David Dwyer. Life on the Line is brought to you by Thistle Productions. Artwork by Big Cat Design, music by Dan Van Werkhoven. Thanks for listening, and lest we forget,